Sup, chooms, how y'all living? Hope everything is Nova and you're all having a preem week. So, there seems to be a popular observation on social media these days regarding Gen Z, meaning people born between the years 1997 and 2012. More and more influencers are noticing that Gen Z is not exactly aging well. There are many popular videos on platforms like YouTube and TikTok with titles like, quote, Gen Z is aging like milk, and quote, Gen Z is aging worse than millennials. At first, I hadn't really noticed this phenomenon because as an older dude myself who was born in the very early 1980s, most of my friends and associates are around my age and I don't interact socially with anyone from Gen Z. The youngest person I know personally was born in 1995, so he's still a millennial. But when I go out to public spaces where I know young people like to congregate, like gyms and malls that are near college campuses, or if I see the adult children of people who are around my age, I do notice something is a bit off about the way members of Gen Z look. Many, if not most of them, have bad skin, sunken eyes, premature hair loss, as well as fine lines and wrinkles which make them oftentimes look years or even decades older than they really are. It's really strange because it seems like there are hardly any young people anymore. People in their 20s often look like they're in their 30s or even 40s. It's not just that they look older too. Personally, I find people in their 30s and 40s to be more attractive than people in their 20s, and maybe that's because I'm older myself, but the problem is that many just look haggard and unhealthy in addition to looking older. They don't have the healthy glow you'd expect from a young man or a young woman. Of course, I'm not claiming this is anything more than just observational or just anecdotal. Obviously, we don't have any hard data on the subject, but when you have so many other people making the exact same observations, then there is a very good chance that there is some substance behind the claims that Gen Z is aging like milk. Also, I know many of my followers on this channel are part of Gen Z, and I'll just go ahead and exclude them from this discussion, because if they are intelligent enough to follow this channel, they are also intelligent enough to avoid the pitfalls that many Gen Z people have fallen into. Anyways, it's known that aging is determined by both genetic and environmental factors. Now, I can't blame this aging on all genetic factors because members of Gen Z are usually the children of Gen Xers or of millennials, and those generations didn't appear to have the same problems as Gen Z when they were young. I remember back when I was in high school and college, pretty much everybody looked their age, so I think this gerontological phenomenon that is happening to Gen Z must be attributable to mostly factors that are environmental or lifestyle based. In particular, I think there are 5 big lifestyle factors popular with Gen Z that are ruining their appearance. So, before I get into that, I have to admit that there is one particular factor that works in Gen Z's favor, and that is the fact that they consume significantly less alcohol than previous generations. Alcohol is, of course, a highly toxic and carcinogenic substance that does indeed contribute to premature aging. So, their relative abstinence from it compared to previous generations is definitely a plus for them. But looking at how old they look relative to their age and compared to previous generations when they were young, it doesn't seem to be enough to mitigate the other factors that work against them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over my 5 reasons that Gen Z is aging like milk. I'll explain why they're unique to Gen Z specifically, and I'll give my explanation as to why these Gen Z lifestyle traits are exacerbating their premature aging. So let's go ahead and begin the countdown at number 5, vaping. According to an NIH study, the population of people who vape the most are aged 18 to 24. If you look at people of all ages, 4.5% of people vape, but with Gen Z, it is 11%. And the amount of Gen Z who are vaping continues to increase. For instance, from 2011 to 2022, vaping increased in middle school students by 667%, and in high school students by 567%. Surprisingly, between the years 2022 and 2023, the number of high school students vaping went down from 14 to 10%, though the number of middle school students vaping went up slightly from 3.3 to 4.6%. But most Gen Z vapers started vaping when they were still children, and since vaping any nicotine-containing product is highly addictive, the ones who started vaping young will find it very hard to quit, even if they want to. Almost half of adolescents who vape want to quit, and about a quarter of them have tried to quit, which was obviously unsuccessful because they are continuing to vape. So, even though Gen Z doesn't smoke as many cigarettes as previous generations, they've replaced cigarettes with vaping, which has both advantages and disadvantages in terms of health. Clearly, vaping fluid doesn't contain the toxic tars found in cigarettes, but it does often contain nicotine, and even when it doesn't, it contains some chemicals that can still be very toxic. People who vape tend to vape a lot more than people who smoke, too. Let's first consider the practicality of vaping compared to smoking. Vaping, unlike smoking, can be done indoors. It doesn't have as much of an odor, the vaping fumes quickly dissipate unlike cigarette smoke, and it isn't considered as much of a nuisance in public, so people are less likely to take issue with it or even notice it at all. And since people can vape indoors, that makes it much more convenient to consume larger quantities of it compared to cigarette smoking. Depending on where you are, you'd have to walk outside in terrible weather if you wanted to smoke a cigarette. Smoking has also become socially unacceptable in the past couple of decades. Most people have a negative opinion about smokers, and that's especially due to the concerns about the dangers of secondhand smoking. So, when people smoke in public, they're not just putting their own health at risk, they're also endangering other people's health, and that's caused smokers to develop a lot of social stigma around their behavior. Most people think that secondhand smoke is just from cigarette smoking, but actually, it is a big problem with vaping too, at least when vaping nicotine products. This study right here showed that being around secondhand vaping significantly increased the risk of respiratory problems. It can cause wheezing, bronchitis, and shortness of breath. So even Gen Zers who don't vape can have a deterioration of their health just by hanging out with other Gen Zers who vape. And let's be real here, if you are a Gen Zer, then you definitely have at least one friend or associate who vapes. Unfortunately, because of the convenience and relative social acceptability of vaping, it's very easy to consume much more of it compared to other tobacco products like smoking or chewing. The most noticeable effect of smoking cigarettes or vaping is on the skin. With cigarette smoking, it's been known for a long time that it causes premature wrinkles. In fact, the effect of smoking on the complexion of the skin was described for the first time way back in 1856. In more modern times, this effect has been confirmed by twin studies, where one twin was a non-smoker or smoked for a shorter duration than the other twin. A longer smoking history caused greater skin aging in the smoking twin versus the twin who didn't smoke or who smoked for a shorter duration of time. Specifically, the smoking twin had more upper eye redundancy, worse lid bags, more lip wrinkles and lip vertical lines, and developed jowls. Not only that, another study measured the length of the skin wrinkles in smokers versus non-smokers, and it found that the length of the wrinkles correlated with the smoking history and whether or not the subjects had COPD, which is chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, which is caused by smoking. We also know that studies comparing the skin of smokers and non-smokers show differences in skin thickness and less elasticity in smokers. So, we don't know everything in tobacco smoke that affects the skin, but one substance we do know that definitely plays a big role is nicotine. Nicotine is a powerful vasoconstrictor, so it reduces blood flow to the skin, which in the long term will definitely damage the skin irreversibly. From basic research studies, it's known that chronic exposure to nicotine increases scar tissue and breaks down elastin in the skin, as well as causing vascular dysfunction. Of course, nicotine is also the substance in both cigarettes and a lot of vape juice that makes these products so damn addicting, and vape juice often contains even more nicotine than what's found in cigarettes. It's also been shown in animal models that vaping nicotine products interferes with wound healing, just like is seen with smoking cigarettes, and that's because it inhibits the production of collagen, which is what gives our skin a youthful appearance. Now, you may be thinking right now, but Kevin, I only vape with non-nicotine vape juice, so it's no big deal, right? Well, it's definitely not as bad as vape juice with nicotine, but it's still pretty bad. You see, it's been shown that the solvents and even the flavorings that are used in electronic cigarette fluids are toxic if they come into direct contact with the skin, which of course it always will in the form of aerosol you exhale every time you take a hit. So even though vaping juice that doesn't contain nicotine is safer than vaping nicotine products, the chemicals that are found in the juices are not benign, and they also contribute to skin damage and skin aging. So please, stop vaping. It doesn't make you look cool, it just makes you look old. Okay, so moving on, we're going to be talking about the internet's favorite fad diet. Next up is number 4, the carnivore diet. So, I'm sure we all know what the carnivore diet is at this point, but you may be confused as to why I'm associating it with Gen Z specifically. Well, there's a good reason for that. If you look at a lot of these carnivore influencers, most of them are young men. That makes perfect sense, because Gen Z men are terminally online, and being that they were raised by their smartphones, that means that they grew up without father figures. So, the people who filled in that gap in their life were alpha male influencers like Joe Rogan, Andrew Tate, and Jordan Peterson. These pseudo-intellectual, pseudo-masculine figures of the intellectual dork web all promote the carnivore diet enthusiastically. In doing so, they helped make diet a focal point of a cringy political culture war for young men by convincing them that eating meat is manly and that eating plants is woke. So, of course, people tried to counter this by turning to science and explaining why plant-based diets like the Mediterranean diet are actually good for you, but then these alpha male influencers convinced Gen Z that we shouldn't trust science because science is woke. They tell young men that all the scientific research you see on the dangers of an all-meat diet or about the benefits of plants is part of some woke plot by Bill Gates, George Soros, the Illuminati, and the Jews to feminize men and promote the great replacement of the white race. So Gen Z men, and to a lesser extent Gen Z women, think they're being badass rebels because they have the dietary habits of a fussy pants toddler who cries about eating vegetables. The real truth, though, is that the only thing they're rebelling against is their own health, especially their skin health. They're ruining their appearance to pwn the libs. Of course, you hear a lot of anecdotes from the carny fans that going carnivore improved their health, their digestion, and even their skin, blah blah blah, but none of these anecdotes are verifiable, and you can just as easily find plenty of anecdotes of people claiming that the carnivore diet caused them to get sick, or even case reports of people getting xanthelasma, which is a skin condition where people develop excessive pockets of disgusting yellow cholesterol that seeps out of their skin. And if we're going to talk about anecdotes, how about the fact that most carnivore influencers on YouTube look like beet red human tomato hybrids? Carnivore dieters will also often talk about how you don't need to eat plants to get vitamin C because some meat products contain enough vitamin C to prevent scurvy. Even if that's true, there is a big difference between getting enough vitamin C to prevent scurvy and getting enough vitamin C for optimal skin health. When it comes to skin health, you cannot get adequate amounts of vitamin C on a purely carnivorous diet, and vitamin C is important for things like wound healing and collagen production, both of which are critical to prevent skin aging. So maybe you won't get scurvy, but you won't get the other benefits of vitamin C. In addition to the complete lack of evidence for any positive effects on the carnivore diet for preventing aging, we actually have research on the anti-aging effects of plant-based diets, including the Mediterranean diet. The Mediterranean diet is a diet based on the diets of some people who are living around the Mediterranean Sea. It is primarily plant-based with the addition of olive oil and some meat, mostly in the form of fish like wild-caught salmon and tuna. This study reviewed the effects of diet and exercise on telomere length. One of the hallmarks of aging is shortening of telomeres. With each cell division, the telomeres can shorten, and eventually there is a loss of telomere function. This is directly linked to the loss of cellular function so that the cells can no longer successfully divide. There's actually a lot of data showing that telomere length correlates with diets rich in legumes, nuts, seaweeds, and fruits, while there is an inverse correlation between telomere length and consumption of alcohol, red meat, and processed meat. Studies show that stable telomere length is associated with the Mediterranean diet. Most likely, this is because of the vast amounts of phytochemicals found in plants that have antioxidant and anti-inflammatory properties, as is common with the Mediterranean diet. If you're eating a carnivore diet, on the other hand, you're getting none of those beneficial compounds. Antioxidants are anti-aging chemicals that prevent oxidative cell damage, including cell damage in the skin. So, the bottom line is that carnivore diets are missing out on nature's ultimate anti-aging compounds, which are the phytochemicals that are found in plants. People on the carnivore diet also run the risk of having low vitamin C levels that result in impaired collagen production and poor wound healing, which means that facial skin cannot properly repair itself from the damages of aging. In addition, meat is very high in AGEs, meaning advanced glycation end products, especially cooked meat, but even raw meat is much higher in AGEs than any plants. Unfortunately, AGEs accumulate in the skin, which leads to impaired wound healing as well as the destruction of keratinocytes in the epidermis. In the deeper layers of the skin, which is just called the dermis, there is cross-linking between collagen and AGEs, causing the collagen to deform while elastin becomes thinner and loses its elasticity. This leads to wrinkles and overall skin aging. Carnivore dieters will try to say that AGEs from food are not important, and they will claim that endogenous AGEs formed in the body are the real problem. Endogenous AGEs can play a role, but there is good data that exogenous AGEs, meaning AGEs from diet, also cause the deposit of AGEs into the skin. For example, in this study right here, dietary AGEs were measured and compared to skin AGEs measured by a skin fluorescence technique. The study found a direct correlation between the amount of AGEs consumed in the diet and AGEs found in the skin. Carnivore dieters like to claim that eating plants causes endogenous AGE production. However, endogenous AGEs are formed from foods high in simple sugars, and most plant-based foods are not only low in exogenous AGEs, but because of their low glycemic index, they don't form endogenous AGEs AGEs either. Even most fruit has a low glycemic index, including apples, oranges, berries, grapefruit, pears, and cherries. The problem with endogenous AGEs comes from high glycemic foods that are high in simple sugars, like candy, cake, ice cream, and soft drinks, basically the diet that Jason Blaha eats. In addition, plants have high water content and contain antioxidants, both of which reduce the formation of endogenous AGEs. So, whatever trace amount of AGEs that are found in plants, they are nullified by the presence of antioxidants and water. To give you an example of the order of magnitude difference in AGE content between plants and animals, an apple contains 45 AGE kilounits per 100 grams, while fried bacon has an astonishing 91,577 AGE kilounits per 100 grams. So the carnivore diet is yet another cause of premature aging in Gen Z. It is a dermatoxic diet, yet Gen Z has gone completely crazy over it because it tells them what they want to hear and all their favorite social media influencers promote it. If Gen Z had grown up being raised by actual father figures instead of smartphones, they would have been taught to eat their vegetables like a normal human being. So that brings us to reason number 3. The number 3 reason why Gen Z is aging like milk is because of their aversion to wearing sunscreen. So you might think, why does this relate? Well, you have to understand, Gen Z has been convinced that the carnivore diet will not only turn them into chads, it will also give their skin literal superpowers. Carnivore guru influencers have convinced Gen Z that by avoiding seed oils and then replacing them with animal fats, they won't need sunscreen anymore since their skin will develop magical powers that will somehow protect it from that giant nuclear fusion reactor in space that showers the planet with 44 quadrillion watts of energy per year, including harmful and carcinogenic ultraviolet radiation. On the contrary, they actually think that sun exposure is good for you and that sunscreen is toxic. So the way carnivore grifters justify this pseudoscientific belief is by claiming that omega-6 fatty acids, specifically in the form of linoleic acid, are pro-inflammatory and that they cause oxidative stress in the skin that breaks down the skin's lipid barrier, which makes the skin more sensitive to ultraviolet radiation. So even if this were true, it would not negate the importance of sunscreen. That would be like saying people with darker complexions don't benefit from sunscreen because their skin has more natural protection. No matter what kind of natural advantage someone's skin has against the sun, they will still absolutely benefit from sunscreen. It's not like eating animal fats instead of seed oils will suddenly give your skin a natural SPF rating of 50. Any differences in skin sensitivity to UV light related to diet is always going to be negligible at best. Also, most of the actual research studies show that the omega-6 fatty acids found in seed oils are actually anti-inflammatory, not pro-inflammatory. For example, in this study of over 2,777 subjects, there was no correlation between the levels of the omega-6 fatty acids and any blood inflammatory markers. An even bigger study that included 43,155 subjects found that dietary omega-6s and omega-3s both reduced inflammatory markers. So overall, there is no evidence from human studies that omega-6 fatty acids found in seed oils increase inflammation of the body or make your skin more sensitive to UV light. On the other hand, there is plenty of evidence that regular use of sunscreen prevents skin premature aging, like this randomized controlled trial of 903 adults who were randomized to use sunscreen versus a beta-carotene supplement versus a placebo and were followed over a period of 4.5 years. The study found no detectable skin aging at all in the daily sunscreen group versus the other groups that all had significant skin aging. So, Gen Zers, please stop with the sun cope. The sun is not your friend, and you don't look like a rebel when you post your TikTok videos bragging about raw dogging the sun. You just look like a sunburnt idiot. There's a lot of other evidence too on the dangers of sun exposure and the benefits of sunscreen, way too much to cover in this particular video, but fortunately I did a whole video about the benefits of sunscreen that I'll go ahead and link below. But the bottom line here, chooms, is that sunscreen does reduce sun-induced skin damage and it lowers the risk of skin cancer. Unfortunately, Gen Z has been fed a lot of propaganda about sunscreen and seed oils, so this is yet another reason why they are aging like milk. So, getting to the number 2 reason for Gen Z's premature aging is their fear of finasteride. So, let me take a moment to explain this one to those of you who are too young to understand. Back during the time when I was a young man, if someone had some medical concern like hair loss for instance, what they would do is they would call their doctor, schedule an appointment, get diagnosed, and if necessary, the doctor would prescribe a treatment, like finasteride, which is great because finasteride is a 5-AR inhibitor that stops the conversion of testosterone into DHT, which is the hormone that causes hair loss. If you had questions about the drug, your doctor would answer them, and if there were any problems with the treatment protocol, well, your doctor would modify the titration to find a dose that is suitable for you. That's how things worked back then with medical interventions. However, things are much different for Gen Z because they think science and medicine are woke. Social media influencers have become the new doctors, and anecdotes on social media have become the new randomized controlled trials. So, when Gen Z has a medical problem, they don't go to the doctor, they go to the same place they're always at for 24 hours a day. The internet. And on the internet, they'll seek out the advice of the same alpha male, black-pilled internet tough guy influencers who raised them. And these influencers will tell them that DHT is a Chad hormone, and that if you take any drug to suppress it, then that makes you a woke leftist cuck. So, instead of using a clinically proven treatment like finasteride to stop hair loss, they'll tell you that all you really need to do is just massage your scalp, use a microneedling device, and saturate your scalp with rosemary oil every night. There's a good reason why so many of these alpha male influencers are bald. So, as a consequence of this terrible advice they give them, we're seeing more bald young men than at any point in human history. Just by going outside and looking around, I am seeing a remarkable number of bald young people, far more than were ever around back when I was in college back in the late 90s and early 2000s. It has nothing to do with lifestyle changes, stress, or any of that other rhetorical cope you hear on social media. It's 100% due to the fact that young people are not turning to doctors anymore for medical issues. They're getting terrible advice instead from shitty health influencers who are telling them that the one treatment that actually works long term, which are 5-AR inhibitors like finasteride and dutasteride, are too dangerous to even consider and too woke because they're made by big pharma. They will literally call finasteride a tranny drug that will cause horrible things like chemical castration or turn you into a woman, or they'll say that it will ruin your mental health and make you suicidal by destroying my neurosteroids, like allopregnanolone. All the so-called evidence they cite is either entirely anecdotal or a nocebo effect, or it's based on poor research that involves animal models that can't possibly be extrapolated to human beings due to the fact that humans respond differently to finasteride than animals do. The rest of the research is based on flawed databases like the FAERS database, where any idiot can report whatever bullshit they want, and of course none of it is ever verifiable. There's also research with strong conflicts of interest, such as being funded by anti-finasteride organizations like the PFS Foundation, who have litigious agendas and will design the studies in a way that will give them the outcomes they desire, such as by using inappropriate control groups and recruiting subjects from anti-finasteride groups who will obviously already have a biased opinion about finasteride. I've literally made hundreds of videos on this subject, so if you're new to this channel and want to learn more about 5-AR inhibitors and why they're actually very safe and effective, then I'll post a few playlists below where you can start your journey. Unfortunately, going bald makes you look older. There's no way to get around that fact. Even the most handsome male celebrity you can possibly think of with hair would look significantly worse if they were bald. That's because hair frames a handsome face. So even if you can pull off the bald look, going bald will always make you look significantly older and significantly less attractive.
And bring on the boys! Welcome to the show, sir. Take it away and give it your best shots.
Hello, ladies. My name is Emmett, and I'm from Roscommon.
Tell us, are you turned on or turned off? Nadine, what happened?
He kind of looks a bit old, and he's baldy like me dad, and
Okay. Shannon, lights off for you as well. I'm doing my best for you here.
It's just the hair, the lack of, I'm sorry.
And since Gen Z has been taught to be afraid of finasteride, many of them will never even touch the one treatment they can use that can actually stop their hair loss, hence another reason why Gen Z is aging like milk. So this leads me to the number one problem behind all of this. I've already alluded to this several times in this video, so you may have already figured out what I'm going to say, but the biggest reason why Gen Z are aging like milk is because of social media addiction. Social media addiction is the biggest problem of all, because if it weren't for social media, none of these other problems would even exist. Every single stupid thing that Gen Z believes in about health and longevity is precisely because of their exposure to social media misinformation. Gen Z is hopelessly addicted to their smartphones. When a Gen Z person wakes up in the morning, they'll check their smartphone before they even take a piss, much the same way a smoker or an alcoholic will make smoking a cigarette or having a drink the very first thing they do in the morning. Gen Z can't really learn anything because they don't have the attention span to sit through anything educational, and it's all due to their addiction to short-form media formats in the internet like TikTok, Instagram, and even the short video segments you see on YouTube now. In fact, I'm not even sure you can call it social media anymore. TikTok is just a bunch of short videos, and there's not a social element to it at all, really. And TikTok is the drug of choice for Gen Z. Most Gen Z can't even get through a movie anymore without their smartphones, which is why watching movies in the theater these days is unbearable, because it is inevitable that every Gen Z dipshit sitting in front of you is going to turn their shitty smartphone on every 5 seconds to see if their latest Facebook and Instagram post is being upvoted by their stupid fake friends. Surveys have even shown that out of all the generations currently alive, Gen Z is the generation most addicted to the internet. This graph shows how long each generation can go without accessing the internet, and 26% of Gen Zers would feel uncomfortable if they had to wait just an hour to get back online. Gen Z is so addicted to low attention span social media brain rot, they can't even read books anymore. That's right, books. You know, those brightly colored rectangles you see behind me, and which since the beginning of human civilization were considered the cornerstones of human knowledge, are now considered to be too difficult, too boring, too time-consuming, and too woke for Gen Z to read. This isn't just me going on an old man rant either here, chums. We actually have some hard data about this. Since around the arrival of the smartphone in 2007, the percentage of 12th graders who have read no books at all for pleasure in the course of a year has shot way up, while the percentage of them who have read at least 6 books in a year has gone way down. So Gen Z isn't just aging like milk, their brains are also curdling like milk. Reading books, even if it is just for fun, is incredibly good for your brain. It's the equivalent of doing resistance training for your mind. There's even some new research showing that the amount of time spent online inversely correlates with test scores for reading and for memory. Kids who were aged 9 to 13 years old who spent little or no time online did the best in these tests, while those who spent the most time online did the worst. So, it's obvious that Gen Z is the dumbest generation in human history, but what does this have to do with aging? Well, it's important to remember that reading improves intelligence and it teaches people to think critically. It raises your vocabulary, it increases your knowledge, your wisdom, it lengthens your attention span, and it helps with brain connectivity. So, only a generation of people who don't like to read like Gen Z would ever be stupid enough to be seduced by these dipshit influencers who have convinced them that Facebook memes are stronger forms of evidence than randomized controlled trials. Another big problem with being glued to social media all day is that it results in a lack of physical activity. In the article on diet and telomere length I showed, the other big factor was exercise. Exercise is definitely anti-aging and has multiple health benefits on cardiovascular health and mental health. This is another great anti-aging tool that Gen Z is not taking advantage of at all. So, you may think that this video is being too offensive to Gen Z, but I don't have to worry about that because no Gen Z people are going to have the attention span to get through this video. Chances are, if they have watched it, then they probably have already forgotten 99% of everything I've said so far. Now, I know that I do have viewers who are parents of young children, so if you have kids, please, for the love of God, do not buy them a smartphone. Giving a kid a smartphone or an iPad should be considered child abuse. If you want to give your kid a phone, give them a dumb phone, like this one right here. This is the Punked MP02. It's just a basic phone, it's sturdy as hell, it has actual buttons rather than everything being on a touchscreen, and all it can do is basically just call and text, and that's all most people will ever need. I mean, you can find many phones like this one that are for sale on dumbwireless.com, and I'll go ahead and link that website below, but no, I am not a paid sponsor for the company. Before you ask, I've never received $1 for them. I just think it's a great resource to buy a dumb phone, and even if you're an adult, I still highly recommend getting rid of your smartphone and replacing it with a dumb phone like this one, and I have done that, and since I did that, my productivity has skyrocketed. I'm doing much more of the things I actually love doing, like reading, exercising, playing video games, finishing important projects, and just having a far more fun and rewarding life in general. Now, I know that there are things like QR codes and cameras that have become ubiquitous and important on phones, so if you feel you can't abandon those features, there are still dumb phones you can buy that have them. Now, I want everyone to keep in mind that when I am talking about Gen Z, I am not talking about all of them. I know there are exceptions to every rule, and I count my Gen Z viewers amongst them, but generally speaking, everything I said about Gen Z is 100% true. So, I know other people have come up with different theories about why Gen Z is aging like milk, but these are my theories. I think there's no doubt that this is a real phenomenon and a very real problem. Unfortunately, unless we can break free of this stranglehold social media has on all of our lives, then I'm skeptical this trend will reverse with future generations. It's only going to get worse unless the internet is given some damn oversight, which it desperately, desperately needs. Okay, chums, hopefully my next video will be more optimistic than this one. There are a number of possible hair loss treatment breakthroughs on the horizon that I do want to cover, and we'll get back to fighting the good fight against the slaphead curse very soon in future videos. So, this is a long video, so if you got all the way through, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you all again soon. God bless.